Hi all, I'm here to talk about Article 20, funding traffic studies to collect data for future speed limit determinations, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or borrow pursuant to any applicable statute the sum of $17,000 to be used for traffic and engineering studies related to the Safety Committee's recommendations for establishing safety zones where appropriate and/or modifying existing speed regulations, or to take any other action related thereto. I'm Laura Harrison. I'm a town resident and a parent and a member of our town's Safety Committee. The Safety Committee is a select board subcommittee whose mission is to bring attention to and work to eliminate unsafe conditions for pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers of motorized vehicles. It includes members from both the select board and the Environmental Sustainability Committee, as well as the chief of police, the fire chief, and our DPW director. Article 20 is related to and works in conjunction with Article 19. So if you haven't watched the video for Article 19 yet, you might want to look at that one first, but I'll give a little recap here about what we're even talking about. So why am I here today? You might have noticed that speed limits in a handful of locations around town were posted higher recently. And you might have even read about it in the Mosquito. Articles 19 and 20 are both related to those changes. They are part of a plan for how the town might legally lower speed limits in particular areas that we think are appropriate. Article 19 is a procedural move to adopt Section 18B of Mass Law so that Carlisle would have the authority to establish safety zones if we choose to. And this article, Article 20, seeks $17,000 of funding to fund traffic and engineering studies to both support the establishment of safety zones and to possibly move to lower existing speed regulations in other areas. So if this motion passes, $10,000 of the total would be used on an engineering study of locations where a safety zone is likely to be permissible, and the other $7,000 would fund traffic studies in a few additional locations to see if the data supports a lower limit. So let me give you an abbreviated version of the backstory here. Speed limit signage changed because it turns out that our posted speed limits were not compliant with state regulations in a number of locations. The bottom line here was that most of the areas that were posted improperly are close to the town center. Essentially, we're just not allowed to lower the speed limit to 25 miles per hour so far away from the traffic circle. The state regs say that the 25 mile per hour zone has to end much closer to the center. The Mass Department of Transportation has authority over local and municipal roads, and amendments to speed limits will often require certification from the state to ensure that they're in our public interest. The Safety Committee recommended that we bring our posted limits into compliance as a first step, and they've been working since then on a plan for how to lower them legally where we think it's necessary. We considered a number of different ways to approach this, and we've worked with town council and town engineering, and there's a lot more detail again in the video for Article 19, but the two best options we really have are, one, to establish safety zones in a subset of locations where 20 miles per hour is appropriate, and two, study the remaining areas and see if the data supports going to the state to ask permission to lower the limit. And we want to do both of those. It's not really one or the other. It's kind of a two-pronged approach. So what's a safety zone? A safety zone is a marked 20 mile per hour area. It looks a bit like a school zone, but unlike a school zone, it's enforceable 24/7 instead of just during certain times of the day. So these can be a good option if you think 20 miles per hour is an appropriate speed. When can you make a safety zone? It needs to be an area that's likely to attract vulnerable users. So that's pedestrians or cyclists, and you need to have a conflict between a motor vehicle and a vulnerable user. And the length of the zone has to be at least 1/4 mile. How do we make one? In order to have the option of establishing safety zones, we need to have adopted Section 18B as a town. That's the piece that Article 19 accomplishes. And then, additionally, we would need to have an engineering study on file that shows that the designated areas meet those requirements. So that's where Article 20 comes in. Article 20 asks for $17,000 total, and about $10,000 of that is related to the second condition to establishing safety zones. So it would fund the required engineering study of the likely locations. Once we run the study and we adopt Section 18B, then the select board is in a position to make that move without any further approval from the state. The remaining $7,000 of funding of the $17,000 total is for that second prong. So in the areas where we don't think 20 miles per hour is an appropriate speed, or we don't think we've met the requirements for a safety zone, we can think about asking the state permission to lower the limit. But before we do that, the recommendation is to run a traffic study of that whole area to see if the data supports a lower limit. And $7,000 would pay for those studies. This mitigates the risk that the state might come back with a different, maybe even worse result. So in summary, Article 20 is a request for $17,000 to be used for traffic and engineering studies related to the Safety Committee's recommendations for establishing safety zones where appropriate and possibly modifying other existing speed regulations in other locations. Articles 19 and 20 work together, and both are part of a plan to see if we can reduce speed limits in particular areas in a way that is compliant with state regulations. Thanks so much for listening.